year is 1863, the second year of the American Civil War. It's cold and blustery near Fredericksburg, Virginia for the Potomac Army when Hooker's incorrect intelligence notifies him of Lee's location. Hooker wants to assume the offensive to force the Confederacy into a defensive battle which they cannot sustain with their mere 55,000 men, compared to the 113,000 men that Hooker has under his control for the Union. Hooker wants the defensive advantage, so he chooses Chancellorsville to be his point of attack. On May 1, 1863, Sedgwick, shown in green, crosses the Rappahannock River below Fredericksburg as a diversion. He wants to place pressure on the Confederates, shown here in black. General Robert E. Lee, suspecting that it's merely a diversion, directs Anderson's forces, shown here, to meet the Union forces coming from the north that have crossed the Rappahannock River, now coming in to Chancellorsville. Hooker orders his troops to advance but runs into some serious resistance here, so he orders a retreat. He wants to fight a defensive battle, forcing Lee to attack him first. Expecting the cavalry sweep further north to cut off supplies and communications for the Confederates, Hooker pulls back into this strong defensive position when they first encounter serious Confederate resistance. Hooker wants the defensive advantage, similar to the kind that Lee had at the Battle of Fredericksburg. Cut off from supplies, Lee would have to now attack or retreat, which is why Hooker ordered the cavalry sweep. Lee and Jackson, after discussing for several hours in meeting, decide on a bold plan. Against all traditional tactical rules, they will divide their army in the face of a superior force. Jackson takes the bulk of an army on a secret flanking mission to the west. Flanking columns of 26,000 troops avoid detection, preparing for a devastating attack on Howard's unsuspecting troops. Late in the afternoon, they sweep on the unprepared flank, driving them into panic back towards the main Union army. Confederates are finally halted by darkness that evening. They suffer a terrible loss with the fatal injury of Stonewall Jackson, injured by his own troops, believing that he was a Union scout. The Confederates now set up a fake defensive line that convinces the Union commanders that they are facing a much larger force that cannot be outflanked. They do this by placing a small number of troops here, making Union commanders believe that they filled in troops here. This makes them think they can't outflank them to the west. This allows the Confederates to shift forces and face Sedgwick to the east, who will soon be crossing the Rappahannock River. Although Howard's forces are broken, Hooker's army repositions and holds the Confederates at bay to the south. Hooker also sets up a second line of defense that he can pull back to defend Chancellorsville if necessary. In desperate fighting, the Confederates have now forced Hooker out of Chancellorsville and further towards the Rappahannock River. Hooker is knocked unconscious by a stray cannonball and is unable to provide leadership in a key point of the battle. Sedgwick has now moved against General Early, crossing the Rappahannock River and pushing them away from Fredericksburg. McLaw rushes to halt Sedgwick and his advancing army. He succeeds, and Sedgwick is halted south of Scott Banks Ford. The Confederates now move the bulk of their army east to meet Sedgwick, but maintain a false defensive position around Hooker, which deceives the vastly superior Union forces. These forces here attack Sedgwick, leading them to believe that the main army of the Confederates has arrived and they are far outnumbered. Hooker orders Sedgwick not to retreat, but orders are delayed and Sedgwick retreats across the Rappahannock River. Hooker's grand plan to defend and maintain a defensive advantage has now fallen apart. Confederate supply trains continue to arrive, meaning that the Union cavalry has not cut off the railroad at Hanover Junction. With Sedgwick no longer a threat to Lee's rear, Lee moves his whole force against Hooker. Hooker was hoping to salvage the battle by moving across Scott's Ford and flanking Lee to the rear, but Sedgwick's retreat destroys his last plan. Hooker withdraws his army, surrenders, and the Battle of Chancellorsville has concluded.